Welcome into NFL on 365 Sports. I'm your host, Grayson, and today we are starting my draft recaps for the NFL draft that just happened this past weekend. I'm going to go through quite a few of the teams, and today we are starting with the Chicago Bears. Let's get it going. All right, so the Chicago Bears. Let's talk about their draft. This was a year where I think you get a new head coach and you're kind of trying to figure out who you want to be, create an identity, right? And you got a young quarterback with Justin Fields and you're trying to build around him and figure out, where are we going next? What are we trying to build into? And I felt like the Bears kind of did that in this draft. They get a defensive coach, Matt Eberflus, to come in, and he's going to be your guy for the future to take you in the next direction. And, well, he focused a lot on the defensive side, which is no surprise. That's what he did in Indianapolis as well. And now moving over to Chicago, he needs to find guys that fit his zone scheme really well, which is kind of tough to find, honestly. You really have to evaluate guys and put them in the position to succeed. So let's go through some of their draft picks. I'm going to really specifically talk about their first three, but then also give some thoughts on maybe a couple of the guys they drafted later and just general thoughts on kind of the direction of this team in general. So the first pick they had was round 2, pick 39, so a nice early second-round draft pick, and Kyler Gordon, the cornerback out of Washington, ended up being the selection, and I felt like this was a really, really good pick. I mean, he fits the zone scheme extremely well. He can play man-to-man coverage on the outside. He's got decent size, which I think is very important. Held up really well when he was specifically targeted by opposing offenses in college. So I like this. Washington is usually a pretty good defensive team as well. They've put a lot of guys into the pros, so I think you're talking about a really good program, and therefore I think you're talking about a guy that's probably been coached the right way, and I think he fits the zone scheme perfectly, which makes him a really nice fit for Chicago. Do I think they were potentially going to go a different direction? Could they have maybe focused on the offensive side? Sure. I thought an offensive lineman would have made a lot of sense here, but I understand it. You have the opportunity to get a guy who is probably one of the top 5 cornerbacks in this class. You got to go take that chance. And so I understood it. I felt like this was a nice draft pick to get things going for the Bears in the second round. So moving on, 9 picks later, they had another selection in the second round, and they went right back to the secondary. I think this is pretty much a head coach saying, this is how we're going to build this team. And Matt Eberflus coming out, drafting cornerback at pick 39, and then turning right back around and going to pick 48 and taking Jaquan Brisker out of Penn State. I feel like it's just basically saying this is going to be our identity. This is what we're going to do. And when you look at what Brisker does really well, it fits exactly what Matt Eberflus did when he was in Indianapolis. He plays great when things are in front of him. Brisker does. He's got 4.49 speed, so solid speed. But he plays so much better when he's, going up against the run or when throws are in front of him and he's able to attack the football downhill. That's where he's at his best. He does give up some plays deep in coverage. You'll see it at times. Beat over the top, and that's something that he's going to have to work on at the next level. But what with him is if you're able to keep things in front of him, you're going to feel really good about Brisker making plays in the open field, also stopping the run extremely well from the secondary. So again, I think this is even more of a scheme fit than Gordon. This just seems like a perfect fit for him. And now that Bears secondary is scary. They have some really good players back there. They're going to be tough to throw on. And I think the other part about it is you want to create turnovers, and Brisker, 5 interceptions over the last 3 seasons. So he's good at finding those plays and getting the ball back to the offense. I think he's a guy who is going to end up being a very nice pick for the Bears as well. So then they had to wait a little bit, and you go to round 3, pick number 71. And at this point in the draft, I was kind of sitting there going, okay, so the Bears have addressed the secondary. Great. They haven't addressed anything else. And they haven't helped their quarterback at all. They haven't built anything on the offensive side. So you figured with this pick, they had to go on the offensive side. And they did. And they went with a guy who is probably one of the more polarizing prospects, I think, in this class. And it's Velus Jones, the wide receiver out of Tennessee. So he turns 25 years old on May 11th. So he's very old, very, very old for a rookie. But if you look at him, you saw the speed on display, that 4.31 at 6 foot, 204 pounds. So a solid frame while also being extremely explosive and extremely fast. He broke out early in his career, which is kind of hilarious to say because when he broke out, it was in 2017. 5 years ago was when he broke out first at USC. And then since then, it's been pretty steady production. He averages 24 yards per catch during his entire career, which has been a lengthy career at USC and Tennessee. 2,973 yards on just 122 catches. That's a crazy stat, but even crazier, 2,973 yards, and this guy only has 2 touchdowns. So he is not a red zone threat, not a guy who you're going to target once you get close to the red zone, but he is a major deep threat downfield and a guy who is just an absolute burner. And for me, when I look at kind of the Bears' makeup of their roster, I think to myself, Justin Fields needs someone who can expand the defense, but more than that, this offense needs someone who is actually going to scare opposing defenses, especially the safeties in the secondary, because you don't want safeties being able to creep up because there's no threat of the ball going deep downfield, because as we know, the Bears want to run the football. They want to turn around, hand the ball off to David Montgomery, and then create play action and create opportunities for Justin Fields where he's not getting pressured immensely. And by having a run game, you're able to do that, but you need guys who can scare a secondary, and Velus Jones can absolutely do that. I don't know if I love the pick, but I think it's actually a sneaky good one just because of the fit with the scheme and what the Bears are trying to do with their offense going forward. So now just kind of looking at their other picks, they had a bunch of other picks in the draft here, 2 5ths, 3 6ths, and 3 7ths. I like Dominique Robinson, who they took at number 174 out of Miami of Ohio. He's a pass rushing linebacker, defensive end. He played wide receiver to start his career and then really showed flashes late in his career of what he could be as a pass rusher. So I really like his upside there. Drafted a couple, 4 offensive linemen. Braxton Jones out of Southern Utah is my favorite of the group. And then I also really like Treston Ebner, the running back out of Baylor. They decided to take him in the 6th round at pick 203. And the thing I like about him is that he provides something unique to their backfield. He's a great, great pass catcher. I think he's going to be a true 3rd down running back for this team. He's going to contribute in special teams immediately. Was an absolute weapon in punt return and kick return at Baylor. But as a pass catcher, 1,500 yards and 11 touchdowns during his career in the receiving department. Also averaged nearly 5 yards per carry on the ground. Had a great final season rushing the ball at Baylor as well. I think he's going to be a sneaky good pick. I think he'll make the roster, and I think he could be a guy who could contribute relatively early, especially on special teams and as a pass catcher for the Bears. So my final grade for this team, I'm going to give the Bears a C+. I am just a big offensive side of the ball believer. I think they could have maybe addressed that even more, especially the offensive line or receiver. But in general, I like what they did. They really fit the scheme. They're establishing a culture. And I think as a Bears fan, there's really nothing more you could want out of a team that's really trying to rebuild and regrow as one of the more dominant franchises in the NFL. So for Grayson Grunefer, this has been NFL on 365 Sports.